First World Conference Against Racism took place in Durban, South Africa in August 2001. Hopes were high that the world could finally be cleansed of discrimination, just as apartheid had been defeated in South Africa.
Every one of us must feel the symbolism of this moment, the conjunction of theme, of time, and of place.
During the preparations in Geneva, northern governments began to impose their own agendas. Europe and the United States negotiated with Africa to avoid having their racist history under the spotlight. In the middle, the United Nations conference organizer, Mary Robinson.
I look at this as an extraordinarily important conference for the victims of racism, discrimination, xenophobia and intolerance, millions of them around the world, and for those who have an accumulated sense that the past has never been dealt with properly.
The transatlantic slave trade, millions of Africans captured. Those who survived the slave ships worked the plantations of the New World and created much of the wealth that the North enjoys today, wealth which Africans have demanded back in the form of reparations.
You cannot solve problems ahistorically. History is our reference.
If we talk about compensation on an international level for acts that happened several hundred years ago, the answer is no.
Countries are seeking, or their representatives are seeking, what I would call to limit the damage, to ensure that there are not implications, particularly in litigation, in language that they might decide upon.
The United States government had other interests to defend. It threatened to pull out of the conference and withdraw its funding if the racist policies of Israel were highlighted.
If the Americans believe they can buy us with money for my own values, then they should rethink their positions on that. If they don't come, that's their business.
Everybody must have the political will to find a solution. Everybody must be prepared to give and take. There must be a degree of flexibility, and there must be tolerance.
With the conference in the balance, South African Foreign Affairs Minister Nkosazana Zuma flew to Geneva to try and save the day. She put on an optimistic face.
Everybody is willing to engage seriously in the negotiations, but there isn't much time left.
Doubtful of the governance, thousands of non-government activists from around the world prepared their own forum against racism. They plan to present a document to the governments to prevent them dodging the important issues like history and globalization.
6 months.
So workshops should be, I think, situated in the vicinity.
From different places, together we come, though different faces, one spirit of love. For all your troubles, your pain and struggle, smile, Africa. There is a new day dawning. You'll be alright in the morning. Smile, Africa.
We're all with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and we're here because we believe in the worth and dignity of every person.
Hello, how you doing? We have come here to highlight the racism, issues of racism inside Tibet.
You're from Hawaii, from
Lakota Nation, USA,
from Zimbabwe,
and from Nigeria.
My name is Tom Goldtooth, and I'm the director of the Indigenous Environmental Network.
No woman, no cry.
I'm here as a Dalit to support our cause.
I'm with the Arab Women's Solidarity Association.
I'll be interested in the slavery and trafficking.
We're not here for the charade, you know what I'm saying? We're here to really combat racism.
It is indeed inspiring to be here in this country.
I think things are beginning to take shape.
As government representatives began to arrive in the Durban Convention Centre, NGOs assembled next door in the Natal Cricket Stadium.
So a lot of success will be scored here.
Working groups and committees met to draft documents for the NGOs to discuss in Durban.
The merging together of 5,000-6,000 people from all over the world. This is an historic experience.
I'm looking forward to building a very strong solidarity network from among those communities whose issues have not been heard so far.
The opening speaker was to be South Africa's President, Mbeki. What did the delegates hope he would talk about?
To what extent do they understand the dimension and interconnection of race and poverty? It looks like they won't appreciate that interconnectedness. The NGO Forum will have to clearly define what are the interconnections, and out of that to develop an appropriate plan of action.
It was, a conference on racism in South Africa? I'm going. I have to be there.
We welcome you to the African continent. As victorious fellow combatants in the struggle that finally liquidated the system of colonialism and transformed the last and most stubborn domicile of white minority rule in Africa into a democratic country. There are some in our country and others elsewhere in the world who, for various reasons, argue that class rather than race is the issue we should focus on if we are to understand the huge inequalities that characterize contemporary human society. The truth, however, is that we have to address both issues of class and race.
The very first political prisoner I learned how to fight for was Nelson Mandela. Having grown up in the segregated south of the United States, I feel a very special connection with people here in South Africa.
Before NGOs could begin to discuss the link between race and poverty, a community from the Dugu forests north of Durban arrived at the stadium. Like many others, they had come to the city during the conference to draw attention to their plight.
Actually, we are pure people. We have got no idea where we are going to, what we will be.
Under the banner, Landlessness Equals Racism, they joined 3,000 others to protest the lack of land redistribution to the black majority in South Africa, even under today's black-led government.
Let them give us our land. Bring back our land. We need our land.
As the NGO community, we have the privilege of being able to break the protocols, to break the silences, to give the solidarities that's needed. And we will speak about Palestine.
There is a huge effort at the conference by the Zionist movement, the worldwide Zionist movement, to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. We are arguing from the position of social justice that Zionism is racism.
Despite the United States pressure, NGO delegates did discuss Israeli racism against Palestinians as well as anti-Semitism against Jews. But the pressure to keep the spotlight off Israel continued even in Durban.
You are representing racists.
The opinion of the European Union is that that problem and that such questions were not to be put here during this conference.
world came communities, indigenous peoples, lower castes, suffering from racism, xenophobia and intolerance. They came in their thousands to demand their rights.
We are collective in that we are not struggling for individual rights. We're struggling for collective rights as peoples with the S.
I am a Secretary General of the International Romani Union. That means International Gypsy Union for those people who do not know what the word Roma or Romani means.
Roma rights!
The most important is one about the anti-Ziganism as a special form of racism.
Roma rights! Roma rights!
The history about the Roma slavery, which was forgotten, and about the Roma Holocaust, the so-called hidden or forgotten Holocaust during the Second World War.
Roma rights! Roma rights!
We want to be recognized, and we want to be given seats in the United Nations on equal footing with the other nations, even if we don't have a state, but as non-territorial nation.
Human rights! Human rights! Human rights! Human rights!
Tibetans are also facing racism. This is a new form of apartheid that Tibetans are going through, where Tibetans inside Tibet, day in and day out, they have discrimination in employment, in education, in housing, at every level, in every sphere there is discrimination.
Paragraph 52. The mention of Tibet should be deleted. So I strongly wish that this request from the Chinese NGOs, 5 of them.
Everybody here wants to add and wants to include, and here there's only one person saying we have to delete. And we're not here to delete, we're here to include as many voices as possible. Actually, everybody knows that there is no real NGO, non-governmental organization in China. It is a gongo. We believe it's a gongo, a government-organized, non-governmental organization.
The NGO forum was designed to influence governments, but in several sessions it seems that government representatives had slipped in to influence the NGOs.
Madam la President, no propaganda from the government in this forum.
It has been made clear to the speaker who just left the podium that this is an NGO forum. This is about us strategizing as Africans and African descendants on how to move our agenda forward.
This is the list of the black officers who were killed by the government of Mauritania. My brother here, the first abolitionist movement. Himself, he has still some relatives in slavery.
It is good to talk about slavery and to ask for reparation, but it is also very important, since we are dealing with principles, to deal with slavery that exists today in Mauritania and Sudan.
I know that they are not happy what I did, what we did this afternoon, but our job is to make them unhappy, and we are happy with that. Yeah.
NGO delegates visited Durban's poorest communities to see firsthand the racism underlying environmental decisions.
If everybody looks towards the left, you'll see a little ship or next to a single buoy mooring there. 80% of South Africa's crude oil is imported through that buoy.
Yeah, in Wentworth, you got all your refineries between the Indian and coloured communities. That's where all your high concentration, you got all your paper mills and your secondary chemical industries are concentrated here in all the black communities. And all the waste that comes out of these secondary industries from your refineries and your paper mill, all that waste goes to Mlazi. A black community gets dumped in Mlazi. There's no dump sites here in the Bluff.
Toxic sites, whether they be polluting industries or landfills or incinerators, tend to be located in black, Asian, native, indigenous communities.
Racism is alive and well in environment.
While governments were deadlocked on just 2 issues, NGOs discussed and debated many aspects of racism. Racism and religious faith.
It's not the faith that is the problem, but it is often the faithful.
Racism and disability.
Nothing about us without us.
Racism and gender.
construction of manhood and womanhood.
And at a 2-day youth summit, the racism faced by young people. After 4 days of discussions, debates and demonstrations, delegates submitted their proposals and the NGO drafting committee drew up a document to reflect the feelings of civil society all around the world. Delegates had a chance to review it before it was finalized.
Shall I read 2 paragraphs? Caste discrimination is a heinous crime against humanity, which is based on a false ideological construct sanctioned by religion and culture, which affects 260 million Dalits in South Asia, as well as other regions in Asia Pacific, African regions at the personal, social and structural levels, irrespective of their religious affiliations. And then go on to say, discriminatory practices based on caste, distinction, exclusion and restrictions deny Dalits enjoyment of their economic, social, political, cultural and religious rights.
The 6,000 plus NGO representatives were able to come up with a document which we can call our own, a document which is the intellectual property of all NGO representatives.
But Mary Robinson rejected the document, citing its strong language on Palestine. She said she would not pass it on to the government conference and refused to enter into any
Robinson,
debate.
I think as you have, Mrs. Robinson.
Just let her go.
It seems the NGOs had been tricked. Many were outraged.
We think that the NGO document reflects the diversity of forces in the NGO world. And we disagree with Mary Robinson's total rejection of the document.
Since the beginning of this process, since Geneva, we have had difficulties as the NGO community to try and raise our voices on issues that concern us. Nobody has commented on our issues around reparations. Nobody has commented on all of the other demands that we are making as concrete demands on taking forward the struggle against racism or the revitalization and redevelopment of Africa. None of that has been commented on. But strong language on what?
It's been important to struggle around the documents and to create documents that will give us some leadership. But it has been my experience that virtually all important change occurs first on the ground, first at the grassroots. And therefore, I think that what was most important about this conference was that people from all over the planet were able to share with each other the kinds of local struggles they are involved in.
In the government conference, negotiators were deadlocked. NGO representatives tried to intervene directly.
Basically, there's a week-long fight on semantics about what words go in, what words go out, and therefore whose rights goes in and whose rights goes out. So we've been lobbying very hard. 200 people have come here from India. We represent the Dalit Human Rights Caucus, and we've been here for 2 weeks, and we're talking about more than 200 million people, and we're fighting for 2 words.
It is not that we are missing the agenda, they missed their own agenda. They should be ashamed of this.
On the streets, 20,000 people marched on the conference center in a show of solidarity between their struggles. The demonstrators had identified a common enemy and underlying source of racism, the poverty and inequality resulting from globalization.
Mr. President, this is addressed to Mr. Mbeki. The Durban Social Forum, representing people of many lands and cultures, declares its solidarity with the forces ranged against neoliberalism and global apartheid.
Remember that we have presented this globalization as a civilized way of resolving historic poverty. Remember that the essence of the globalization and neoliberal proposal is that somehow we're going to create so much wealth by technology and by technological advancement that we're able to feed everyone. We know that's not true. We know that's not happening. Either we address these issues through diplomatic form, or we're going to see what happened in the 50s and the 60s, where people would erupt, revolt, and willing to die.
The government conference had hardly begun when the United States and Israel made their exit.
We are leaving because we were forced to leave. We would like to thank the South African people. Bye-bye South Africa, bye-bye Durban.
The government has abandoned their own people because they don't want to represent.
It's letting itself down. It's letting its history down. It's letting the great heroes of the United States down by not attending this conference, because it would appear the United States is saying we don't give a flying F about the issues of racism, intolerance, and xenophobia.
The U.S. government was founded on genocide. It was founded on the capture and enslavement of people, where you inherit the wealth and you inherit the liabilities. So it's about the current government dealing with the liabilities that result from slavery.
Our motives as a nation are suspect in that we came the low-level delegation, late, never assumed a seat, and left before there's a resolution on the floor. So that suggests that perhaps that we left in a huff to divert attention away from the deeper issue of the transatlantic slave trade and debt relief and debt reduction, AIDS, and other global issues that really matter at this conference. It is regrettable that we left. It was immature, premature, and unnecessary.
Reparations now! Reparations now! Reparations now! Reparations now! Reparations now! Reparations.
With the United States gone, Europe led the negotiations with Africa.
I like Africa. I like the African people. I like them really. Their generosity, their spirit, their culture. So I like them really sincerely. But I think in such a debate, you must have enough love for Africa to explain them. That of course, a big part of the fault is the fact of the past and of my community, Belgium and Congo, of course, in Rwanda, in Burundi. But now time is come to say them, you are strong enough now also to take over a part of your own destiny. Of course, colonialism has very bad aspects, of course. But in the time of colonialism, that could not be considered as, for instance, a crime against humanity. Because in that time, in Europe and in other countries, colonialism was a sign of economical good health.
In the end, Europe got its way. African governments withdrew their call for reparations to save the conference. The final declaration did denounce slavery as a crime against humanity, but no provision was made for reparations or compensation for the past. Instead, developing countries were urged to try and harness the benefits of globalization. People's struggles that challenged powerful states like Israel and India were watered down.
Esta reunión está simbolizando el futuro.
There is no doubt that this meeting is a symbol of the future. The future of the world.
Dentro de la enorme variedad de criterios e ideas.
This including all the great diversity of views and ideas.
De una forma u otra tratan de construir un
I realize that the people are trying to build a new world within that diversity.
Nosotros partimos del punto de vista de que
we base ourselves
el orden económico
on the viewpoint
impuesto al mundo
that the economic order imposed on the world
insostenible.
Is unsustainable.
This conference was just the bringing together of a process.
Between now and the next five years, we're going to be able to evaluate the impact that we are going to make as we leave this conference in our various communities and countries.
I'm someone who always feel that people are in struggle, cannot give up hope. So we see this as one other step.
You are getting a weapon, which is in any case a blunt weapon from the word go. It is not a sharp weapon in any case. It's up to you how you hone it and how you use it back in your own places.
The NGO document remains the most comprehensive assessment of the racism challenge.